Welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast, the show where we help sports coaches and PE teachers learn how they can impact their athletes' movement and physical development in a fun, practical way. I'm your host, Isaac, founder of Athletic Skills, and in today's episode, I'll be chatting to Josh Marlow, strength and conditioning coach at the Peers School in Cambridge. He'll be chatting about his experiences in S&C in his school, and also providing some tips on how you can make S&C practical in any environment that you're working in now. So whether you're a sports coach or PE teacher, working in any age group or sports, this podcast is here to help you learn how you can impact youth athletes' fundamental movement and children's physical development in a fun, practical way. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and I hope you enjoy the show. This podcast is brought to you by Brendan Chaplin Business Coaching. Brendan guides coaches and service-based entrepreneurs to deliver their best work, build a seven-figure lifestyle and performance business, and create a life of freedom. I started working with Brendan in September 2023, and it's been a great journey since I started working with him in launching my own business, Athletic Skills. Brendan has been fully invested in me and is a great person to chat with, to share ideas, and has vast knowledge and experiences to share also. The reason I picked to work with Brendan is that he has done it himself, launching businesses, and has a similar background to myself in S&C and wants to live a life that you want. If you want to speak to Brendan on how he can help create a life of freedom and guide you on that journey, get in touch with him by one of the methods in the show notes and DM him the word coach, and he will start the conversation. You won't regret it, and there's a good chance it might just change your life too. Hi everyone, welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast, and I'm delighted to have Josh Marlow on board with me. So thank you, Josh, for coming to chat on here around S&C in schools. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Isaac. Yeah, just to reiterate what you said there, my name is Josh Marlow. I'm currently the strength and conditioning coach over at the Peers School in Cambridge. I oversee how we put S&C into our PE, our extracurricular, our games program, and then how we support our more talented athlete kids. I also oversee the strength and conditioning for the Norfolk region netball. So the regional academies, we look after under 15s and under 13s mostly in there, and then a little bit younger help there. So that keeps you busy kind of day to day, and then still got my kind of finger in some general pop work too as well. So yeah, quite busy on a week to week basis.
And then just to tie in with that, it'd just be good to know why you're passionate around working in S&C in schools and why you wanted to really help this area.
Yeah, so obviously there's, over the years, the research has got a lot better. There's always been those wives' tales about how younger years shouldn't be doing athletic development, you should be doing strength and conditioning. And I think hopefully some points we'll talk about today is how the culture of exercise has changed quite a lot, how kids and what they do, how technology has changed the way their day-to-day lives work. I think it's important that this is brought in at an early age, and the research heavily supports that too. So it's great to be within a population where we can have some really good exposure and some impact before it's not too late, but before the patterns and the culture of adult life get in the way of being fit and healthy, basically.
Yeah, so in today's podcast, we're going to chat around S&C in schools, and is there a need for S&C in schools? First question we'll start on is, do the majority of children enjoy sports, or the PE that currently is going on at the moment?
I think they do. I think with kids, obviously we have to guide and expose them to as many activities and sports as possible. That doesn't mean that the mainstream sports don't work. You still have your typical rugby, football, basketball, netball, cricket. However, saying that, I think there is now, if the research supports that participation rates are dropping within kids across sports, then it's important that we're filling that gap with something else. As we know, as participation rates drop, is this because kids aren't as confident in their ability? Is this because of other influences? It could be anything really, but it's important that I think as we go through the years, we're giving kids as many activities to supplement changes in their lifestyle. So at least every child growing up is getting the mandatory minimum amount of exercise per week, per month, and so forth.
And over your time working in this area, have you seen that change in terms of participation rates, in terms of kids in sport or PE, both in with you and outside of school?
Yeah, I think like when we were younger, I think there was a bigger push on that free play element. So it would be you get home from school and you wouldn't basically be allowed in the house. You're out down the local woods with your friends, or at the weekends you're out playing games. Like the unstructured play element of being young was so much bigger now then. Whereas nowadays with technology and with how the sport has become more structured and almost more commercialized, I think we're beginning to lose that unstructured play element that I think a lot of kids was keeping them fit and healthy for the most part. When it comes to activity, we need to think about how it is keeping our kids healthy, not just from a physical point of view, but that mental well-being, that anxiety point. Kids nowadays, again, I haven't got the figures to hand, but the research shows that anxiety is going up, mental well-being is on the decline. And this kind of concept of like physical confidence. So I know obviously the guys over at Cardiff Met, I know Josh Warren, a few other kind of big names are massively working around this kind of big melting pot of like physical confidence and then how that implements what we deliver and how that delivery affects our kids. So it's really important that this all ties in, and that if kids aren't getting that unstructured play outside of school, that maybe that's when it needs to be brought in-house and we're giving them at least some loading, some exposure, some non-sport based activity to at least tide them over that bog standard training stimulus.
Yeah, I think it's quite relevant at this time of year as well. Around, you mentioned a lot around mental being and anxiety, especially around exam season, around the balance of sport and PE and other activities, and then your revision. So I'm sure you've had a lot of stuff around kids trying to balance the revision and the big push on parents around exams and on the side of exercise as well.
Yeah, and we see it. We see kids almost try and get themselves out of games, out of sport, out of PE to revise more. But again, the research says the opposite. A lot of the research points towards actually kids who continue to have their physical activities during their exam periods do go on to be better in their academics. Obviously, there are external factors to that, but ultimately, we should be trying to push the notion actually, like if you are a student who has balanced yourself well over the last 5 to 7 years, depending on if you've done sixth form as well, you're going to have that background of revision, that background of knowledge. So actually the extra 1 hour that you're then taking away from your exercise to revise probably isn't going to add the same marginal benefit as if you were to go out for a run. Like we know how biochemistry changes in the brain from exercise and how that relates to cognitive tasks as well. So again, it's hard to explain that to parents a lot of the time. Like we need to make sure that we're trying to be as fair and as forward thinking in terms of where the students want to go, especially in private schools where there's a big push on obviously your Oxbridge candidates who are really pushing for those very small, minute intakes. But again, like they're putting the hard work and actually they need a little bit of time to relieve that stress before they can then absorb more information.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So if we look at sports and PE currently within schools, do you reckon it meets the needs for young people in terms of their physical competency and their development? Does that current structure meet their needs, would you say?
Yes and no. It comes down to resources. We see education being stripped back. We see the funding in education being stripped back. And when resources aren't replenished, it makes it harder. So it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that maybe your PE teachers, your sport coaches are going to have to think a bit more outside the box, maybe bring in external coaches for CPD or look for packages. But ultimately, it's just about being inventive. If you think about it in terms of a training spectrum, of course, we want PE to have an educational element. Of course, we want it to be teaching technical models of things within sport, especially. But there's nothing stopping you from doing a 10, 15-minute ramp warm-up that encompasses a bit of plyometrics, a bit of strength, that requires very little kit and actually is going to give some training stimulus to what we need. Like we know that cardiovascular efficiencies come down massively within kids. And it's been one of the biggest declines is that cardiovascular fitness element. And it's hard, isn't it? Because your old school PE lessons were go do a 10-minute warm up of some laps around the Astro whilst your PE teacher sets up. And it's obviously not always the best way to use that time. But for those who are actually putting in 10 minutes of effort, it's a great way to stimulate the cardiovascular system. So it's about balance. It's about having a bit of a plan and then being able to reinforce that plan when there's critical thinking around or some evaluation around why are we doing this? That's why it's really important to review your programs. And the problem with sport, I think, is you only get in as much as you only get in terms of benefit as much as effort you put in. So if you're someone who doesn't enjoy PE in the first place and you've got an hour session on netball or cricket or whatever, then the amount of training stimulus you're going to get out of that, the amount of expression you're going to get out of that is going to be quite limited. Whereas if you're someone who enjoys your sport, then of course you're going to get more out of it because you're going to put more effort in. And that's why having that multifaceted approach, that's why trying to build in things like movement breaks, things like short S&C breaks or like little mini games where we can get the attention of our young people first, then you will hopefully get more out of them. And also it's remembering that kids don't necessarily always know what they want. So if you can create a really fun environment with some balance, but ultimately you might sway those few kids who are really resistant to thinking of exercise as something that could be enjoyable or beneficial. and something that could be a part of their lifestyle in the future.
And I think it's balancing that group of people that are going to be hiding away in the corner of the sports hall or at the back of the line in around this game, for example, and stimulating them, as also stimulating the ones that are really keen in sport and want to develop their actual sporting in skills. I think that ties in quite nicely into the participation versus talented athlete pathway. So what experience have you had around working with people that are just doing for participation for fun, but then also having some sort of scholars or people that are looking to develop their actual sporting skill and play at a good standard?
Yeah, so I think academy sport and the professionalism of youth athletes has grown massively. I'm not sure in terms of the intake numbers if that has changed on that end, but in terms of kids being given that support package, it's only gotten better. If I think back to when I was younger, there were very few kids I can think of who were in academies who were getting an all-round package. But nowadays, we have kids who are in cricket setups, rugby setups, and they're getting dedicated S&C plans, they're getting additional support. So the professionalism side of things is growing, and I think that's a good selling point for a lot of schools, is to be able to say, actually, we've got 10 to 20, 30 kids every year who represent us at a regional, national, international level. Can we find a way of supporting them and essentially that benefiting the school too, and increasing the kind of awareness of what the school can offer, and that in terms of, could that sway a parent in terms of bringing their child to your school? And in our situation, that could mean the difference between an additional student being part of our school and representing them and not. I think that's probably the easiest sell if you're talking to, say, senior leadership or if you're talking to stakeholders. But then from that, we get that trickle down effect. So because you've got that setup in place, it's then easier to bring in sub-areas, sub-categories of bigger groups of children who might not necessarily even go on to be a regional or an A-team player, but because you've got them at such an early age and they've bought into that training system, you then see actually you get a really big uptake in terms of physical activity levels and also their enjoyment of sport too. So I think it's really important that for our elite athletes, yes, we know a lot of their training is very structured, very much geared towards going on to that pro level. But ultimately, we know the percentage of young people or young athletes who make it into any sport is very low. So it's really important that we're preparing them with the skills, the physical skills, and obviously the mental skills to be able to go into some other career and thrive in that career too. So in terms of an elite level, it's definitely the easier sell. Participation, I think, is a missed trick in a lot of places because that's where we actually get the most bang for our buck, and that's where we can really change someone's lifestyle, especially if you can implement it in, say, PE or in your game sessions, because that's when you see your kids the most too. Because PE is an academic lesson, it means it's a protected amount of time that you can have with a cohort of kids, especially if you're someone who can go across all those PE groups. You can then deliver essentially that same format, that same structure, that same exposure to, for example, for us, we have 1,600 pupils, give or take, and we deliver PE through year 7 all the way to year 11. And obviously some of their options change in that sense, but they're all going to get at least 30, 40 minutes of some form of training exposure. And we try and make it as taught as possible, but equally, like I said, if it comes down to a wet weather game session and the pitches are unusable, that's over 40 minutes you've got with a group of kids you might not have gotten. I think there's more global benefit to the participation model. And it's also, again, thinking of those kids who might not enjoy mainstream sport, or your kids who are just like DE team players who are there to make up the numbers or just don't enjoy sport. It gives them a bit of a rest too. It means they're not spending an hour on a sport they don't enjoy. They're going to get 20 minutes of doing some coordination work or some plyometrics. And most young people like jumping. Most young people like running around or playing inventive games. One of my favorite games is playing Pac-Man, because we've got so many lines on our netball and basketball court. The kids love playing it as a warm-up game. Really easy way of getting agility, speed, and a bit of plyometrics into a session. So my kind of mindset has changed so much around this. When I originally started at the Purse, the goal and the gear was very much around that elite athlete support and that game support of the A teams. But as we've transitioned our program into PE, we're finding that more and more of our kids are using the extracurricular slots. They're coming in the mornings. They're coming in lunchtimes and after schools. Our sixth form and our talented athlete kids can come in pre-morning during registration and use that time efficiently. So we're seeing a big push on kids using their extra time to be fit and healthy and to use the gym and to find something they enjoy, because the gym is a great place for individual progress. We can regress and progress everything. So it's an environment that everyone can find. It's a really, really big benefit from.
And I imagine you said there's a lot of success around the stuff you're doing around the participation pathway and things. Imagine it took a little bit of time to get that actually in place within your school. Is there any tips around how you got buy-in for those kids that maybe aren't too interested in sports or PE and to get their buy-in into these extracurricular activities in some form of S&C that you're doing? So yeah, is there any tips you've got around that?
Yeah, so for us, it was quite straightforward in the sense that because we had PE delivering that athletic development technical model as such, it meant that because we were giving them a taste of it within their lesson, it then encouraged them to come back in extracurriculars to do more of it. So we were really lucky in the sense that PE was a really big driver for us. And then the way in terms of, I don't want to go into too much because I know our next episode is going to explore that a bit more, but like from year 7 to 11, there was a nice kind of shifted scale of technical versus fun. So for example, our year 7 PE, our squat focus and our pull focus is basically just them rolling around trying to find a good squat shape. But because of how we structure our PE, it meant that they're not spending an hour on it and getting bored of it. There's always that want and desire to come back and do a bit more. It's also about incentivizing it, give kids challenges. We find that works. You don't have to be an 18 player to find a challenge within something. It's about knowing your kids too. So if you know you've got kids who are high achievers in, say, maths, then make sure your targets that you're setting in the gym are maybe percentage focused or rep focused. It doesn't have to be about load. It can be about seconds under tension. It could be about creating very good visual displays. Like we know kids learn really well from moving and from viewing. So we started using our smart boards and our whiteboards more to give kids an understanding of how their scores are changing across the year. So they can see that actually when they came in with us at the start of the year and they did some jump testing by the end of the year and they've gone up 7%, they can go, actually, I've seen where this progress has come from. So in terms from a buying point of view, create really good relationships, create good relationships with members of staff who are responsible for looking after your teams. So like our head of PE, our head of rugby, head of basketball, head of netball and so forth. And put yourself out there to begin with. So for extracurricular wise, we brought in a first team basketball club on a Monday morning. That works really well. Again, a big jumping focus. And then we try and divvy up our mornings between kind of our junior academy setup, which is like our young talented athletes. We're talking about just A and B team players across year 8s and 9s. So that everyone's getting some chance to be in there and feeling like they're special because they're getting their own dedicated session.
No, that's great. I think we'll touch it probably in the next episode around what actually might go on in those sessions and the difference between age groups. But I think, like you mentioned at the start, there's a lot of it around busting these myths around S&C and what S&C actually is within schools. So I think touching on one question that we've had around from Ben pulling around, how can S&C be accessible to all schools? So have you got any recommendations or advice in terms of how different schools who may have different funding can actually implement some form of S&C into their curriculum or into their sessions? So yeah, just any tips you've got.
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's really important to understand we don't need to have loads of kit to kind of push some form of training stimulus and to find that kind of area of interest, especially when it comes to things like sprinting and jumping. It just needs to be short and sweet. Of course, we know that kids respond really well to like physical tools, so like hurdles, boxes and stuff. Second of all, reach out to local coaches. There's got to be strength and conditioning coaches, athletic development coaches, athletics coaches in your area that are looking maybe for some work experience, or if there can be a way of bringing them in on a part-time or a kind of volunteer basis to begin with and trialing something at your school. And if it works, and there might be some funding available to go forward with it. Create partnerships. So I guess speaking from a more personal point of view, my previous school, Langley School, we had local partnerships with all our local primary schools in terms of doing like a little running, like 3 and 5K. So actually, if you can create those partnerships for things like running, like marathons, short marathons, whatever, like little running challenges, there's nothing stopping you doing that in terms of an athletic development point of view. Like creating an outreach program within your area might be a really good way of sharing if there is any costs across schools, and having maybe a coach that can go around schools. Like how awesome would that be if you could have an S&C coach who looked after a region, looked after maybe 10 schools within an academy or a trust, and their job was to go around and implement like S&C on a very basic level to begin with, because things like that work really well. Shares that cost effectiveness if there is a cost to it. But there will always be volunteers. There'll always be young kind of degree, undergrad or postgrad or in between years coaches who want to come out and find work. And I think it's important that there are coaches who are willing to reach out and offer some volunteering. I know it's not always the best thing. I know people need to pay their bills and so forth, but it's where you learn most of your craft is at early years, early foundation years of coaching. And then from there, trialing different schemes, so trialing extracurriculars, trialing coming in for certain games, afternoons, and just seeing if you begin to get a bit of an uptake. And then from there, it can hopefully blossom.
And I think there's a lot of myths around S&C, people thinking that you need gym, you need high-tech equipment, and it needs to be all heavy lifting and stuff. So I think highlighting these for the schools that S&C is important and the real benefits of it, and then showing the schools as well, they're investing in the PE teachers that are already there, and then they can deliver a good S&C through warm-ups or through movement breaks that we'll discuss another time. It can be a real good way to implement S&C without actually changing anything drastically within the school. I think that's quite another good way to implement S&C, would you say?
Nowadays, and obviously the UKSCA brought out their S&C trainer qual, which is meant to fill that gap for teachers and coaches who want to build their S&C knowledge. But I don't think you even need to go that far sometimes. I think you could easily look online and just, there's more than enough free resources out there for people to use. It doesn't need to be this all singing or dancing program. Like, it could be you just find some exercises that feature a jump, a sprint, and a throw. And that could be your 10-minute S&C session to start off a lesson. It could be as simple as that. It doesn't need to be this big program. And for a lot of schools, that's where they'll get their benefit. And also, it could just be short and sweet. It could be outside. It could be inside. Like, there's a reason why things like throwing, sprinting, and jumping have lasted the test of time. It's because they're the things that work and are researched, and they work well time after time. And they're fun too. And I think that's a really big thing here is don't be afraid to play fun games to begin with and get their kind of cognitive awareness. They're wanting to be a part of the lesson, because we know when we start sessions with good primers and good simple tasks that get people involved, they're going to get more out of the session, and they're going to listen to you more as well. Like, a lot of the videos, a lot of the stuff we do with our county girls at netball, the first 10 minutes is just mucking around. It's got nothing to do with netball. It's literally just playing games, getting them involved, getting them interested. And then from there, you got them for the next 15, 20 minutes. And then from there, the rest of the session is going to what you want to do. So, yeah.
And I think as soon as you shift your mindset from around fun and enjoyment and creating healthy lifestyles or healthy relationship with fitness and exercise for their later life, I think that's when you can really open your mind up for different things and really getting them engaged and showing that exercise and S&C can be fun. And it's not just squats and lunges and so on. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and we know also that the majority of our kids, all of our kids, whether they are on a regional or national pathway, the majority of our kids will not have a training age. They will have no idea how to do basic movements and just actually and also you'll probably find those kids who are very good at sport are probably the worst movers. That's normally what I see within our like top athletes. They are tight, they are fast because they're probably an early maturer. So you spend more time trying to get them into good positions than the child who is a C-team hockey player who doesn't really enjoy sport, but can come in and has a really good looking squat. So I think it's really important that each kid, yes, if we're thinking about our teaching standards and trying to almost go down like a lesson plan point of view, we need to make sure we're creating regressions and progressions for all kids. That's the most fun part about your session is you can basically create this really big spectrum of exercises, whether that's in a game session or PE, and then just deliver. You just go through those progressions and you give the kids the option to try different movements, and they will probably self-limit themselves anyway. For example, if we're talking about trying to improve like overhead strength, your session could be focused around some basic gymnastics. It could be like doing a half pike on a box into some shoulder taps, or it could be working some kids up to handstand holds or wall walks, like really fun basic movements that get kids involved. It's really good for their shoulder complex at the same time. And that's before we just start touching on things like coordination. So like tennis balls, like balancing. Again, it doesn't have to be, I know we talk about training stimuluses a lot, but it doesn't have to be this big loaded hard session. Remember, if you haven't got the buy-in, when you want those harder sessions to be completed, they just won't do them. So you might as well spend the majority of your time building really good relationships and getting kids enjoying that 15, 20 minutes you deliver. So then when you want to push them a bit harder, you've got that buy-in already.
You could have the best session ever, but if you don't have that buy-in or any fun within that session, then you're not going to get the great outcomes from that. I think, yeah, the key things around this is making S&C fun and enjoyable, and adding lots of different unstructured play elements into your training, and just be creative, I think, and don't be afraid to try new things as a PE teacher or as a sports coach with your athletes, and think a bit more outside of your sport. But no, I
Yeah,
appreciate it. Yeah. Go on, Josh.
sorry. And that's the other thing is you are also on this learning journey. So you might see a drill that you really, and you go to do it and you're like, actually, it didn't work particularly well. But then if you think about the movement you're trying to create, and I do this all the time at County, to be fair, some of our best sessions have been the ones where myself and the head coach, Gemma, have just gone, we want to work on this thing in particular. Can we just try a few drills and see what happens? And sometimes those are the drills that actually have the biggest benefit, or those are the drills that actually we get the best reception from the girls. So I remember this year we had a really simple build-up drill where it was just 3 girls in a line. And you basically had to throw an overhead pass on the first one. The girls had to rotate and catch it on 2 feet, and then literally throw it as hard as they could to their other player on the other side. And then we just progressed it with bringing in footwork or landing on one leg or where the throw was going. We ended up doing that for about 7 weeks straight, because every time I tried to change it, the girls would then kick up a fuss because it was something they really enjoyed and they could see the relevance to how that then transmitted into their game. Because if you can't land on one leg, whether it's inside or outside, as a netball player, you're going to really struggle, because we always want to be trying to face down courts. We found a huge uptake on that drill. They loved it. They just wanted to do it all the time. So I had to start thinking of new ways to progress the drill whilst keeping the drill in the same place. So yeah, just take simple games off YouTube. That's what I tend to do. Find some really simple like tag games or territory games, or games where lots of kids are doing something, and then just bring in little modification rules to challenge the kind of area you want to challenge, whether it's cardiovascular system, whether it's strength system, whether it's power system. It doesn't need to be a standalone, especially for young kids. Just keep them moving.
And I imagine that even though that one went really well, I imagine there's a few drills that didn't go down too well, but it's just not being afraid to try new things and get things wrong. Because I think as PE teachers and sports coaches and S&C coaches, you're not going to be the perfect coach straight away. So have fun trying new things, and you might find things that work and what don't work. So yeah, still be afraid to try new things, I think, like you mentioned.
Absolutely, yeah.
But no, thank you very much for your time, Josh. Is there any way people got any questions from this session that they can get in touch with yourself and ask a few questions?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, so they're more than welcome to ping me a message on LinkedIn. I will leave you my email as well. So if people want to get in contact, I'm more than happy to talk through anything to do with strength and conditioning. And if they're struggling with ways to structure sessions, or if they need just some advice on the best ways to approach certain situations in terms of your delivery, then they're absolutely happy to help.
Perfect. And in another session, we're going to cover S&C and P. So keep an eye out for that session with Josh, and we'll get a bit more detail into how to integrate S&C within P and what some of the exercises or movements you might want to include in that. So thank you, Josh, very much for your time, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Isaac.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a like, subscribe, and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description, and we'll be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.